The inheritance letter trembled in my hands as I stared at the zeros trailing across the page. $5 million, the kind of money that could secure Connor's future, the specialized care and education he desperately needed. But I already knew what would happen next. The same thing that always happened when money entered our family's orbit. My name is Peyton, and I've spent the last 8 years watching my family live like royalty off my hard work, while feeding me empty promises about helping my son. Darling, you won't believe what just arrived. My mother Lucille's voice carried through the marble foyer of her unnecessarily massive house. The click of her Louboutins against the floor announced her approach before she appeared, perfectly coiffed as always. I quickly folded the letter and tucked it into my jacket pocket. Mum, we need to talk about Connor's therapy bills. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, honey, not now. The caterers just called about Saturday's garden party, and I simply must have your opinion on the menu. She pulled out her phone, already scrolling through options. Mom, I'm serious. The specialized program costs. Peyton, please. You know we'll help with Connor when we can. But right now, your father and I have the club membership dues coming up, and Reagan's wedding shower to plan. She trailed off, distracted by something on her screen. I bit back the bitter taste in my mouth. The same club membership they'd been paying with my borrowed money for the past 3 years. The same promises they'd been making since Connor's diagnosis at age 3. There you are, Reagan breezed in, designer shopping bags dangling from her arms. Aunt Lucille, I found the perfect centerpieces for the shower. A little over budget, but they're absolutely divine. I watched them coo over crystal vases while my son's future sat heavy in my pocket. The same pocket I'd been emptying into their bank accounts for years, believing their promises that they'd help Connor when grandmother Regina's inheritance came through. Did you hear about the inheritance? Reagan asked suddenly, her eyes sharp despite her casual tone. What inheritance? Lucille's head snapped up. I forced a confused smile. No, what inheritance? The lie felt strange on my tongue, but something in Reagan's expression made me hold back. I'd seen that look before. The same one she wore when she convinced me to loan her money for her business venture that mysteriously never materialized. My phone buzzed, a text from Connor's teacher. Connor had a difficult day. Need to discuss additional support services. I should go, I said, standing up. Connor needs me. Oh, that boy, Lucille sighed. If you just consider that residential facility we talked about. He's not going to a facility, Mom. He needs specialized education and therapy, which you promised. We promise a lot of things, darling. Life is complicated. She turned back to Reagan. Now, about those centerpieces. I walked out, their voices fading behind me. In my car, I pulled out the inheritance letter again. Grandmother Regina had always been different from the rest of them. She'd seen Connor for who he was, not as a burden to be managed. My phone lit up with another text, this time from my father Don. Your mother mentioned something about Regina's will. Call me. I started the car, my decision crystallizing with each turn of the wheel. 8 years I'd watched them spend my money on parties and luxuries while my son struggled. 8 years of broken promises and dismissive waves. At a red light, I pulled out my phone and called Angela, my aunt who'd always stood slightly apart from the family's extravagance. I got the letter, I said when she answered. I know. Her voice was quiet. They're already planning how to spend it. Not this time. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I'm done watching them take everything while giving nothing back. Be careful, Peyton. You know how they get when money's involved. That's exactly why I'm done playing nice. I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror and barely recognized the determination in my own eyes. They want to talk about inheritance? Let's talk about inheritance. But this time, we're playing by my rules. As I pulled into Connor's school parking lot, I saw him waiting with his teacher, flapping his hands in that familiar way that meant he was overwhelmed. My beautiful, brilliant boy, who deserved so much more than empty promises and conditional love. Game on, I whispered, tucking the letter back into my pocket. The time for family loyalty was over. Now it was time for justice. The next morning, I arrived early at my parents' house, following the familiar sound of voices to their sun-drenched kitchen. I paused outside the door when I heard my name. Peyton's always been difficult, my mother was saying, especially since Connor. I mean, we love the boy, but she refuses to be practical about his situation. Have you seen the cost of those special schools she keeps talking about? Reagan's voice dripped with false concern. It would drain the inheritance in no time. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering. They didn't know I was there yet. Regina always had a soft spot for her, my father added, but we can't let Peyton waste millions on, well, on my son. I stepped into the kitchen, making them all jump. Please finish that sentence, Dad. The silence was deafening. My mother recovered first, smoothing her silk blouse. Darling, we were just discussing. I heard exactly what you were discussing. I pulled out the inheritance letter and slapped it on the marble counter. And now we're going to discuss this. Reagan's eyes widened, darting between me and the letter. My mother snatched it up, her perfectly manicured nails crinkling the paper. $5 million, she breathed, then quickly composed herself. Well, of course, your grandmother meant this for the whole family. We'll need to discuss the most responsible way to... No. The word came out sharp enough to make her flinch. We won't, because there's nothing to discuss. The letter is addressed to me. But surely you understand, Reagan leaned forward, her voice honey-sweet, that Aunt Regina would want us to use this wisely. Those special needs programs you're looking at, they're so experimental, so uncertain. My phone buzzed, a video message from Connor's morning aide, my son beaming as he successfully completed his morning routine independently for the first time. The contrast between his pure joy and this room full of vipers made my chest ache. Uncertain? I held up my phone, playing the video. Look at him. Look at what he can do with just a little support. The support you all promised to help provide. Peyton, my father stepped forward. Be reasonable. We're family. Family? I laughed, and the sound was bitter even to my own ears. Family doesn't take hundreds of thousands of dollars from their daughter while promising to help their grandson, then spend it on garden parties and country club memberships. My mother's face went white. Those loans were what, Mom? Emergency assistance? Because I have the receipts, all of them. Every time you needed money for your lifestyle, while promising you'd help Connor once the inheritance came through. You're being dramatic, Reagan cut in. We all help each other. Really? I pulled out my phone again, opening my banking app. Should we go through the transfers? The $50,000 for your business venture that never existed. The $75,000 for Mom's kitchen remodel. Dad's boat. Now, see here. My father started, but I wasn't finished. I believed you. Every time you said you'd help Connor once you had the means. Well, now the means are here, and suddenly his needs are too experimental. My mother's face hardened. If you're going to be difficult about this, perhaps we should let the lawyers handle it. Perfect idea. I gathered up the letter. I'm sure they'll be very interested in the paper trail of where my money's been going these past 8 years, not to mention the tax implications. You wouldn't dare, she hissed. We're your parents. Watch me. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Mom, cancel my contribution to your garden party. I'm sure you understand. I need to be practical about my spending. Peyton, wait, Reagan called after me. We can work something out. Maybe if you let me manage the inheritance. I stopped, hand on the doorknob. You know what's funny? I actually came here hoping you'd prove me wrong. That you'd finally put Connor first, just once. The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. I'll see you all at the garden party, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. I think it's time everyone knew exactly what kind of family we really are. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again. Another video from Connor's aide, this time of him saying, "I love you, Mom," unprompted for the first time. I sat in my car, letting the tears fall freely. They weren't tears of sadness anymore, but of determination. My son was worth fighting for, and if my family wanted war, I'd give them one they'd never forget. I started the engine, already planning my next move. The garden party was in 3 days, and I had a story to tell. You need to see this, Angela said, spreading documents across her kitchen table. The afternoon sun cast long shadows over bank statements, emails, and handwritten notes. I've been keeping track ever since Regina got sick. I picked up a paper with my mother's distinctive handwriting. What am I looking at? Evidence. Angela's normally gentle face was set with determination. Lucille's been planning this for years. Look at the date on that note. The note detailed plans for redirecting the inheritance, dated 3 years ago, right when my mother had convinced me to invest in their summer house renovation. There's more. Angela pulled out her laptop. Remember that business venture Reagan needed money for, the one that supposedly fell through? She pulled up a social media post showing Reagan on a yacht in the Mediterranean, dated the same week she'd claimed the business deal collapsed. Lost everything in the failed investment, the caption read, followed by a laughing emoji. My hands clenched into fists. They were never going to help Connor, were they? No, honey. Angela touched my arm. But Regina knew. Why do you think she left everything directly to you? A knock at the door made us both jump. Angela peered through the peephole, then quickly opened it. Get in here, quick. Reagan slipped inside, looking uncharacteristically disheveled. Peyton, thank God you're here. You have to help me. I stood up, gathering the papers. I think you've got that backwards. No, listen. She grabbed my arm. Aunt Lucille's losing it. After you left, she started making calls. She's trying to get the inheritance invalidated, claiming you're an unfit mother because of Connor's condition. The room went cold. She's what? She's gathering statements from Connor's old teachers, the ones who suggested residential care. She's building a case that you're emotionally unstable and can't manage the money responsibly. Angela cursed under her breath. That sounds like Lucille. Why are you telling me this? I studied Reagan's face. Why now? Because... Reagan's eyes filled with tears. Because I saw Connor's video, the one from this morning, and I remembered when we were kids how Regina always said family meant protecting each other, not using each other. I wanted to believe her, but 8 years of betrayal made it hard. Prove it. She pulled out her phone, hands shaking. I recorded Mom and Aunt Lucille talking about their plans, about all of it, the money they took from you, the lies about helping Connor, everything. The recording played, my mother's voice crystal clear. Once we get control of the inheritance, we'll put that boy somewhere he can get proper care, and Peyton can finally stop this ridiculous crusade. My father's voice, but the money she loaned us, we'll call them gifts, my mother replied. She has no proof otherwise. Who would believe her over us? I stopped the recording, feeling sick. When was this? An hour ago. Reagan looked at her feet. I'm sorry, Peyton. I knew what they were doing was wrong, but I never thought they'd go this far. Angela was already at her desk, pulling out more files. I have copies of every transfer, every promise they made in writing. They can't fight this. They can try. I sat down heavily. And they might win. You know how influential they are in this town. Not for long. Reagan's voice had hardened. The garden party on Saturday. Everyone who matters will be there, including Judge Martinez, who handles family court cases. I looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting, she smiled grimly, that it's time for the truth to come out. All of it. In front of everyone who's ever believed my mother's lies. Angela nodded slowly. Regina would have wanted that. She always said the truth has a way of setting things right. My phone buzzed. Connor's afternoon therapist sending his daily progress report. My beautiful boy was thriving, growing, proving everyone wrong who'd ever underestimated him. Okay, I said, standing up, but if we do this, we do it my way. No more games, no more schemes. Just the plain, ugly truth. I have something else you should see, Angela said, pulling out one final envelope. Regina left this with me before she died. She said to give it to you when you were ready to stand up to them. Inside was a letter, And as I read it, tears blurred my vision. It was everything. Every manipulation, every lie, every broken promise, documented in my grandmother's careful hand. Saturday, I said, folding the letter carefully. We'll let them have their perfect garden party. And then we'll show everyone exactly who they really are. Reagan picked up her phone. I'll make sure the right people are there. And I'll bring the receipts, Angela added. Looking at them both, my aunt who'd always stood in the shadows, my cousin finally choosing the right side. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. The war was just beginning, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting alone. The day before the garden party, I walked into my parents' house unannounced, clutching a folder of documents. My mother was directing staff setting up for tomorrow's event, her voice sharp with irritation. The roses go on the left, not the... Peyton. She froze mid-gesture. What are you doing here? Family meeting, I announced, loud enough for my father to hear in his study. Now. We're rather busy. Now, Mum. Or I start making phone calls to your garden party guests about some interesting financial matters. Her face tightened, but she called out, Don, come here, please. My father emerged, looking wary. Peyton, this isn't a good time. Sit down. I pulled out 3 bank statements and laid them on the coffee table. Let's talk about Connor's therapy fund. My mother's eyes narrowed. What about it? The one you emptied last year for your spa renovation? I pushed the statement toward her. The money I specifically saved for Connor's speech therapy. We explained that, my father started. Or maybe we should discuss the college fund Grandmother Regina set up for Connor. I laid out another statement. The one you convinced me to let you invest right before your cruise to the Bahamas. My mother's face flushed red. How dare you come into my house and make accusations? They're not accusations when I have proof. I pulled out my phone, playing Reagan's recording. Their own voices filled the room, discussing their plans to declare me unfit. The color drained from my father's face. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her wine glass. Where did you get that? She whispered. Does it matter? What matters is I have it, along with every email, every text, every transfer receipt from the past 8 years. I leaned forward. Did you really think I wouldn't keep records? We are your parents, my mother hissed. Everything we've done has been for this family's benefit. No, I stood up, my voice shaking with rage. Everything you've done has been for your benefit. While my son, your grandson, struggled without the support he needed, support you promised to provide. That boy needs more than any of us can give, my father said weakly. That boy is your grandson. And he's thriving, no thanks to you. I pulled out my phone again, showing them Connor's latest therapy video. Look at him. Really look at him. He's making incredible progress with just the bare minimum of support. Imagine what he could do with the resources you promised him. My mother turned away from the video. What do you want? I want you to stop trying to invalidate the inheritance. I want you to back off and let me use it the way Grandmother Regina intended, to help Connor. Or what? My mother's voice was dangerous. Or tomorrow, at your precious garden party, everyone learns the truth. Every detail, every betrayal, every penny you stole from your grandson's future to maintain your lifestyle. You wouldn't dare. But there was fear in her eyes now. Try me. I gathered my documents. You have until noon tomorrow to call off your lawyers and sign these papers confirming you won't contest the inheritance. If you don't, I start talking to everyone. This will destroy this family, my father pleaded. You already did that. I headed for the door, then turned back. Oh, and Mom, remember Judge Martinez, who you're counting on to help you. His grandson is autistic. I wonder how he'll feel about what you've been doing to Connor. My mother's wine glass shattered on the floor. Noon tomorrow, I repeated. And if you try anything between now and then, if you make one move against me or Connor, the recording goes public immediately. Outside, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my key in the car door. My phone buzzed, a text from Angela. Did you do it? It's done, I typed back. They know what's coming if they don't back down. Another text came through, this time from Reagan. Mum's calling everyone in a panic. It's working. I started my car just as my father came running out of the house. Peyton, wait, we can discuss this. I rolled down my window. Noon tomorrow, Dad, not a minute later. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of my mother in the window, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing frantically. The carefully curated image she'd maintained for so long was cracking, and she knew it. My phone rang, Connor's aide. He had an amazing day today, she said when I answered. He wrote his whole name by himself. Tears pricked my eyes. That's wonderful. I'll be there to pick him up in 10 minutes. I ended the call, feeling stronger than ever. Tomorrow would either end this war or escalate it beyond repair. Either way, I was ready. For Connor, I was ready for anything. The garden party was in full swing when I arrived at exactly noon. Crystal glasses clinked, string quartet music floated through the air, and my mother's social circle buzzed with their usual self-importance. My mother stood near the rose garden, checking her watch every few seconds. You're late, she snapped when I approached. It's exactly noon. I held up my phone, displaying the time. Where are the papers? She glanced nervously at her guests. This isn't the time or place. Then I guess I should go talk to Judge Martinez. I turned toward the distinguished man by the fountain. I'm sure he'd be interested in... Wait! She grabbed my arm. Don has the papers in his study, but please, can we do this quietly? I followed her inside, where my father sat behind his desk, looking defeated. The papers lay unsigned in front of him. Sign them, I said. Peyton, please. My mother tried one last time. Think about what you're doing to this family's reputation, like you thought about Connor's future when you emptied his therapy fund. A noise from the doorway made us turn. Reagan stood there with Angela and, to my shock, Judge Martinez himself. I hope I'm not interrupting, the judge said, his eyes sharp. But Reagan here was just telling me a fascinating story about misappropriated funds meant for autism therapy. My mother's face went pale. This is a private family matter, is it? The judge stepped forward. Because as head of the family court and someone who personally understands the challenges of raising a child with autism, I'm very interested in this situation. My father's pen shook as he quickly signed the papers. My mother looked like she might faint. Now, the judge continued, shall we discuss this in private, or would you prefer to address your guests? You planned this, my mother accused, glaring at me. No, Mom. You planned this years ago, when you decided your lifestyle was more important than your grandson's needs. The string quartet music drifted in through the windows, along with the murmur of guests surely wondering where their hostess had gone. Sign the papers, Mom, Reagan said quietly. Or I start playing the recording out there. My mother snatched the pen and signed, tears of rage in her eyes. You've ruined everything. Actually, Judge Martinez interjected, I believe you did that yourself. And we're not quite finished. There's the matter of the funds that were, shall we say, misappropriated. I have all the documentation here, Angela stepped forward, holding up a thick folder. The next hour passed in a blur of legal terms and negotiations. By the end, my parents had agreed to repay every penny they'd taken from Connor's accounts, with interest. The judge made it clear that if they didn't comply, they'd face much worse consequences than social embarrassment. Now, I said, gathering the signed papers, you have a garden party to host. I suggest you put on your best smile and pretend everything's fine. It's what you're good at, right? My mother straightened her designer dress, tears still threatening to fall. You'll regret this. No, Mom. The only thing I regret is believing your promises for 8 years while Connor suffered. As they headed back to their guests, Reagan touched my arm. I recorded everything, just in case they tried to back out. Thank you. I turned to the judge. And thank you for coming. He smiled sadly. My grandson is the same age as Connor. The thought of someone denying him care for the sake of luxury. He shook his head. You did the right thing. Outside, the party continued as if nothing had happened. but I noticed several guests watching my parents with newfound suspicion. Whispers followed my mother as she tried to maintain her usual commanding presence. My phone buzzed with a text from Connor's weekend sitter. "Connor asked when you're coming home. He made something for you." "I think that's my cue to leave," I said to Angela and Reagan. "Go," Angela hugged me. "We'll keep an eye on things here." As I walked to my car, I heard my mother's strained voice carrying across the garden. No, everything's fine, just a small family matter." But it wasn't fine, and we all knew it. Her carefully constructed facade was cracking, and through those cracks, everyone could finally see the truth. My phone buzzed again with a photo, Connor beaming proudly next to a painting he'd made. The colors were bright and hopeful, just like his future would be now. I started the car, leaving behind the sound of clinking crystal and forced laughter. The war wasn't over. My mother would never forgive this humiliation. But I'd won the battle that mattered most. Connor would get everything he needed, and no amount of garden parties could cover up the truth anymore. A week after the garden party, I sat across from my mother's lawyer in his plush office, watching him squirm as he read through the documents Angela had compiled. "Mrs. Craig," he cleared his throat, "I must advise you to drop this matter immediately." "Excuse me." My mother's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "These records," he spread out the papers, "bank transfers, emails, recorded conversations. The evidence is overwhelming. If this goes to court, you'll lose everything." "But the inheritance is ironclad," he cut her off, "and attempting to challenge it now would only expose your previous financial activities to legal scrutiny." My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. "I want a different lawyer." "You can try," he said, standing up, "but any competent attorney will tell you the same thing. I'm withdrawing from this case." He turned to me. "Ms. Craig, I apologize for any distress this has caused you and your son." After he left, my mother sat in stunned silence. For the first time in my life, I saw her looking truly defeated. "It's over, Mum," I said quietly. "Just let it go." "Let it go?" She laughed bitterly. "Do you know what people are saying about us? The calls I'm getting. The club is reviewing our membership." "Maybe you should have thought about that before." A knock interrupted us. Reagan poked her head in. "Sorry, but you need to see this." She held up her phone, showing a social media post from one of my mother's closest friends. Heartbroken to learn how the Craig family treated their own grandson. As a grandmother myself, I cannot stand by silently. "It's going viral," Reagan said. "Everyone's sharing it." My mother grabbed her phone, frantically scrolling. Her face went ashen. They're talking about the truth," I finished for her. "That's what happens when it finally comes out." Her phone started ringing, the country club president's name flashing on the screen. She declined the call with shaking fingers. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Money? Public apology? What will make this stop?" "I want what I've always wanted," I said. "I want you to acknowledge what you did to Connor. I want you to make it right." "How?" "Start by repaying everything you took. Then, maybe consider actually being a grandmother to him." She looked up sharply. "You'd still allow that?" "That depends on you. He's not a burden to be managed or a problem to be solved. He's your grandson, and he's amazing." My phone buzzed. Connor's new specialized teacher sending a video. I played it for them. Connor successfully completing a complex task, his face lighting up with achievement. "This," I said, "is what proper support looks like. This is what your garden parties and club memberships stole from him." Reagan wiped tears from her eyes. "He's incredible." "Yes, he is." I stood up. "So what's it going to be, Mum? Are you ready to be part of his success story, or do you want to keep fighting a battle you've already lost?" She stared at the phone screen, where Connor's video was still playing. For a moment, I saw something crack in her perfect mask, something that looked almost like regret. I don't know how," she admitted quietly. "Start by coming to his therapy session tomorrow," I said. "Just watch, learn, see who he really is, not who you assumed he was." Another call came through on her phone. this time from her closest friend at the club. She declined it again. Your social circle is crumbling, Reagan observed. Maybe it's time to build something real instead. My mother was silent for a long moment, watching Connor's video loop again. Finally, she looked up. What time tomorrow? 10 a.m., I said. Don't be late. As Reagan and I left the lawyer's office, she grabbed my arm. Do you really think she'll come? I don't know, I admitted, but for the first time, she's facing real consequences. Sometimes that's what it takes to change. My phone buzzed with a text from Angela. Don just called. He wants to know if he can come to Connor's therapy too. I showed Reagan the message. She smiled. Maybe there's hope after all. Maybe, I agreed, but this time, they have to earn it. Walking to my car, I felt lighter than I had in years. The war wasn't over, but the battlefield had shifted. Now, instead of fighting against my family, maybe, just maybe, we could start fighting for Connor together. But first, they had to prove they deserved the chance. At exactly 9:55 a.m., my parents' luxury SUV pulled into the therapy center's parking lot. I watched from the window as my mother checked her reflection, then actually wiped her eyes before stepping out. They came. Connor's therapist, Sarah, whispered beside me. Are you ready for this? No, I admitted, but Connor is. My son sat at his therapy table, arranging his cards with focused determination. He'd made so much progress in just the few weeks since I'd secured the inheritance and started his intensive program. The door chimed. My parents entered, looking completely out of place in their designer clothes. Hi, buddy, my father said awkwardly. Connor continued arranging his cards, not looking up. He needs time to process new people in his space, Sarah explained gently. Why don't you sit and observe? My mother perched on the edge of her chair like she was afraid it might bite her. What is he doing? Creating a visual schedule, I explained. It helps him understand and prepare for his day. Done, Connor announced proudly, looking up. His eyes landed on my parents and he tilted his head. Grandma? Grandpa? Yes, sweetheart. My mother's voice cracked slightly. We came to see you. Connor turned to me. They came to see me? They did, I nodded. Would you like to show them what you've been working on? He considered this for a moment, then grabbed his communication tablet. With quick, practiced movements, he pulled up his latest achievement, a complex series of sentences he'd constructed himself. Look, he said, pressing play. The tablet spoke in its electronic voice. My name is Connor. I am 8 years old. I like dinosaurs and numbers. I am smart and strong. My father made a choked sound. My mother pressed her hand to her mouth. That's remarkable, she whispered. When did he learn to do that? 3 weeks ago, Sarah said. Once he had access to the right tools and support, Connor's progress has been extraordinary. Connor beamed at the praise, then turned back to his tablet. Grandma, want to see my dinosaurs? My mother's perfect makeup was definitely smeared now. Yes, sweetheart, I'd love to. For the next hour, we watched Connor work through his therapy sessions. He showed them his new skills, his coping strategies, his achievements. With each demonstration, my parents' rigid postures softened slightly. He's not just managing, my father said quietly. He's thriving. This is what I've been trying to tell you, I replied. This is what your money games almost cost him. My mother flinched. Peyton, Not now, I cut her off. This is Connor's time. After the session, Connor gave them both a high five, a huge step for him with new people, before heading off with Sarah to his next activity. In the waiting room, my mother finally broke. I was wrong, she sobbed. We were so wrong. Yes, you were, I agreed. The question is, what are you going to do about it? My father pulled out his checkbook. We've already started liquidating assets. The first repayment will be... I don't just mean the money, I interrupted. Connor needs grandparents who see him, who support him, who celebrate who he is instead of trying to change him. Tell us how, my mother said. Please, I want to learn. There's a grandparent support group here, Sarah said, joining us. They meet every Thursday. They learn about autism, share experiences, find ways to connect with their grandchildren. My parents exchanged looks. Thursday is our club lunch, my mother said slowly. Then, straightening her shoulders, I'll cancel our membership. Mom! No, she held up her hand. You were right, all of it. The club, the parties, the image, none of it matters. I want to know my grandson, the real Connor, not the Connor I imagined or feared. My father nodded. We both do. It won't be easy, I warned them. You've got a lot to make up for. We know, my mother said, but we'd like to try, really try this time. Connor's laugh echoed from the therapy room, that pure, joyful sound that always made my heart soar. My parents turned toward it, and for the first time, I saw something new in their eyes, not pity, not embarrassment, but wonder. Thursday then, I said, don't be late. As they left, I watched them walk to their car, heads close together, talking intently. My phone buzzed with a text from Reagan. How did it go? I typed back. They're joining the grandparent support group. Her response came quickly. Holy shit. Maybe miracles do happen. Maybe they did. But this wasn't just a miracle. It was the result of standing firm, demanding better, and finally making them see the truth that had been there all along. Connor wasn't the one who needed to change. They were. Happy birthday, Connor. The small group gathered in our backyard sang as my son beamed at his dinosaur-themed cake. No fancy country club party, no excessive decorations, just the people who truly mattered. My mother stepped forward with a wrapped gift. Can I give him mine first? I nodded, watching as Connor carefully unwrapped the package, a skill he'd mastered in his occupational therapy sessions. It's a communication device, he exclaimed, examining the sleek tablet. Like at therapy. So you can have one at our house too, my mother explained, her voice soft. For when you visit. Connor launched himself at her in a rare, spontaneous hug. My mother's eyes met mine over his head, filled with tears of joy instead of shame. Look what Aunt Reagan and I made, Angela called, wheeling out a giant poster board. Connor gasped as he saw what it was. A visual schedule for the next 6 months, including his therapy sessions, school activities, and planned visits with grandparents. You included our Thursday museum trips, he noted, pointing to the recurring picture. Of course, my father said. We wouldn't miss those. He'd been taking Connor to the Natural History Museum every Thursday after his support group meetings, learning to connect with his grandson through their shared love of dinosaurs. Reagan approached me with a thick envelope. Speaking of not missing things, she handed it to Connor. Open it, buddy. Inside were printed screenshots of bank transfers. The final repayments from my parents, with significant interest. But what made me catch my breath was the additional transfer. Reagan's entire inheritance from Regina, signed over to Connor's trust fund. I don't need it, she said quietly. He does. And it's what Regina would have wanted. Reagan, I can't. Yes, you can. Consider it 8 years of aunt duties I need to make up for. A squeal of delight interrupted us. Connor had discovered the small swimming pool we'd installed for his water therapy sessions. Can I try it now? He asked, using his new tablet to form the question perfectly. After cake, I promised. Remember our schedule? He nodded seriously, pointing to the timeline we'd created. Cake first, then swimming, following the plan. My mother touched my arm. Peyton, there's something else we need to tell you. She nodded to my father, who cleared his throat. We've sold the country club membership and the summer house. We're using the money to start a foundation. A foundation? For families like yours, my mother explained, to help provide therapy and support services for children with autism. We're calling it Connor's Bridge. I stared at them, speechless. Judge Martinez is helping us set it up, my father added. He says there's a huge need for it in our community. Mom, Dad, we can't undo what we did, my mother said, but we can try to prevent other families from facing the same struggles. Connor's voice cut through the emotion. Cake time now, following the schedule. Everyone laughed, gathering around the table as Connor carefully cut his cake using the adaptive tools Sarah had provided. I watched my son, confident, supported, thriving, surrounded by people who finally saw him for the amazing person he was. You know, Angela said beside me, Regina would be proud, not just of Connor, but of you. You fought for him when it would have been easier to give in. We all did in the end, I replied, watching Reagan help Connor serve the first slice to my mother, who was actually wearing jeans for the first time in probably decades. More than that, Angela smiled. You helped them become better people. Look at them now. She was right. My mother, who once cringed at Connor's stimming, was now patiently waiting as he explained each dinosaur decoration on the cake. My father, who'd wanted to hide Connor away, was proudly filming every moment on his phone. Ready for swimming after cake, Connor announced, using his tablet to emphasize his excitement. Following the schedule, everyone responded in unison, our new family motto. As I watched Connor enjoy his birthday, surrounded by genuine love and support, I realized something profound. Our story wasn't just about revenge or justice. It was about transformation. My parents hadn't just repaid money. They'd rebuilt themselves into the grandparents Connor deserved. Mom, Connor called, holding out a piece of cake. Sit with me? I joined my son, accepting the perfectly cut slice. Around us, our small but mighty family continued celebrating, all pretense and performance stripped away, replaced by something real and precious. We'd lost the facade of a perfect family, but we'd gained something better, a true one, built on understanding, acceptance, and love. Just like Connor's schedule, we were following a new plan now, one that finally put him first. He put him first. He put him first. He put him first. He put him first.